Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit this article for the record from the New York Times of April 12, 2007. The headline is, "In 5-Year Effort, Scant Evidence of Voter Fraud."
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Tanner, it's a privilege to be able to spend some time talking to you about this very important issue. You mentioned in your opening remarks that the purpose of the voter purging effort from your division was the result of a pursuit of voter fraud. And my colleague, Mr. Franks, referenced the state of Florida and numbers something like 2,000 people who were listed as voting in both Florida and in another state. When former Attorney General Gonzalez was here and we had an opportunity to question him about voter fraud, pursuing voter fraud being a priority of the Department of Justice and what a grave concern that was, he was unable to produce any significant evidence of widespread voter fraud, particularly deliberate voter fraud. And I will reference the Federal Election Assistance Commission analysis that specifically said that despite the Department of Justice's pursuit of voter fraud, and despite your testimony just now that it is in the hundreds as far as convictions, only about 120 people have been charged and 86 convicted as of 2006 with voter fraud. And most of those, number one, were Democrats, and number two, were found to only have mistakenly filled out voter registration forms or misunderstood eligibility rules. So my question is this. I would think and wholeheartedly support that the pursuit of voter fraud, particularly deliberate voter fraud designed to impact an election, would be a worthy goal. But it doesn't appear that the Department's pursuit of voter fraud has turned up any evidence of that, very little in fact. And my specific question is that at any time during your tenure as chief, have you drawn up a list of voters that were thought to be ineligible to vote or ought to be removed from the rolls as part of your Section 8 enforcement activity? And if so, in what states or cases and what methodology was used to create that list or lists? And the reason I'm asking you is that in 2000, and I'm from the state of Florida, our former Secretary of State and former colleague here in the House, Katherine Harris, purged 100,000 voters from our rolls in Florida who were eligible to vote. And so a widespread effort on your part and the part of your division to do that, especially in light of the fact that there has been scant evidence of voter fraud and less than 100 convictions from your department, seems that this is an overzealous activity that rather than continue to focus on that, you should be pursuing the low-income registration that you have completely abdicated your responsibility to do, and that is part of your mandate under the law.
I welcome the opportunity to address your question. First, our section has nothing to do with voter fraud. The criminal division of the Department of Justice prosecutes cases of voter fraud. Our statutes are voter access cases. We do have...
but what is the purpose? Then if your section has nothing to do with voter fraud, what is your department's purpose in pursuing purging of voters from the rolls? What's the reason for doing that?
Under the National Voter Registration Act, passed by the Congress and signed by the President, there are list maintenance requirements that first of all require notice before anyone is purged, and that also require that persons who have died are no longer...
Let me just interrupt you a second, because I want to make sure that rather than expounding, you're answering my question specifically. For example, I understand the general purpose of purging, but the priority that your division has made it is what deeply concerns me, especially given the track record from my home state. In 2007, a lawsuit was dismissed from the Justice Department that was filed against the Missouri Secretary of State, alleging that her office failed to make a reasonable effort to remove ineligible people from local voter registration rolls. It was dismissed because the judge ruled that the government had provided no evidence of fraud. I don't understand why it appears to be such an important priority, since voter purging really seems to mostly just be an administrative function, and in my lifetime has always been treated as an administrative function, but your division has elevated it to a massive priority, and you just testified that your division has no responsibility for pursuing voter fraud. So why?
Counties in Missouri were removing voters from the active voter list without the notice required by the NVRA. They were removing voters. Other counties were not removing voters, and there was a county that had more voters on the rolls than they had people.
They purged 50,000 in 2002, and in spite of that, you pressured them in 2005 to remove more, even though they were very likely being cautious about removing voters from the rolls so that they avoid the problems that they had had years before.
I think it's accurate to state that voters were being removed in Missouri without notice.
And you were encouraging them in 2005 to remove more.
We sued them to stop them from removing voters without notice. That was a count in our lawsuit.
Well, it was the primary purpose of your lawsuit was that that Missouri was failing to make a reasonable effort to remove ineligible people from local voter registration rolls, and that was dismissed in April of 2007. Isn't that correct?
The case was dismissed because the court determined that we had to sue each of the individual counties that was removing voters without notice.
But a component of your lawsuit was that the office in Missouri had failed to make a reasonable effort to remove ineligible people from local voter registration rolls, not what you are representing here today as the primary purpose.
There were two purposes, both.
And you're conveniently only choosing to talk about the one that was not related to pushing them, pressuring them to remove ineligible voters from the rolls, even though 3 years before they had made a mistake in removing 50,000 voters from the rolls. Isn't that right?
I believe that the complaint, which addresses both issues, speaks for itself. We'd be happy to provide additional documents to the committee, but we are...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.